All right, welcome back. Good, afternoon this time. Why not? So today we're going to be talking about the politics of protest, Unit 9.5. This is sort of an umbrella sort of thing. There's a lot of different things that happen here. A lot of different groups we're going to talk about. Again, you could take an entire semester over just the stuff in this PowerPoint easily, and there's a lot of stuff I had to leave out, a lot of stuff I missed. This is to kind of give you a brief overview. This is some of the stuff, some of the people and stuff that might show up on the STAR test. It's in the TEKS, There's also some very interesting stories, and again, none of this happened all that long ago. Plenty of these people we're going to talk about are still alive, or at least were alive when you were alive. So some of these folks, or their kids are still around, not grandkids or great grandkids or, great grandkid. Oh, my great grandpa was at the. No. We're talking about like their kids, they grew up with them. So the first one we're going to talk about is Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers, and you might think, well, then why did you put the Obama slogan here, Mr. Trask, if we're talking about Cesar Chavez? That's because that's where Obama got it from. And if you're like me and don't know Spanish, si se puede, and I didn't pronounce that right, my apologies, that roughly translates to yes we can, and that's where Obama got it from in 2008, was Cesar Chavez's rallying cry for the United Farm Workers in the 1960s. So, the United Farm Workers is one of the organizations. There were a few different organizations that were founded. They sort of eventually united into United Farm Workers by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. 1962 is when it was founded. This is a picture from one of their more recent protests. You can see the red flag with the eagle on it. That's the logo. It's a labor union for farm workers, as the title sort of implies. This is, factory workers have had unions for a long time. Other groups have had unions for a long time in America. This is one dedicated to farm workers, full-time farm workers, migrant farm workers, seasonal farm workers, United Farm Workers. And it still exists today. There's over 10,000 members in the union. They still do stuff today. The most famous thing that happened with Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers was the Delano Grape strike. There's a lot of other things that happened. Again, you could really dig into the story of the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta. But we're going to hit the Delano Grape strike. 1965, so a few years after organizing UFW, he puts together a boycott of California grapes because the people that are picking the grapes are getting low pay, terrible working conditions, and it takes a few years, but in 1970 the workers win a new contract with better pay, safer working conditions, and that's how unions try to get things done. Does it always work? No, probably not. No. Actually, we can honestly say no, it doesn't always work. But that's generally the union tactic, right? And then 1975, because of the popularity of the strike, because of the political influence, and by that I mean like a lot of people agree with them and will vote with them, of the United Farm Workers. California passes the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, ALRA, which makes it easier for farm workers to actually unionize. So now there's more farm workers unions, more people joining the UFW. And this, by the way, you might be looking at this and going, but wait a minute, Mr. Trask, I thought that was Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. Why are there Asian people marching here with signs in an Asian language? Because it's the United Farm Workers. Cesar Chavez did not put this together only for Latin Americans. He did not put this together only for Hispanic farm workers. This is farm workers of all races coming together to fight for better working conditions, fight for better pay, fight for, more, fair treatment from their employers, and that included the Asian farm workers out west in California. So that's why I picked that picture. The lasting legacy of Cesar Chavez. His organizations lead to a lot more political power for Americans in minority groups, Hispanic Americans, Filipino Americans, and like on the last slide, other Asian Americans, Filipino Americans or Asian. And obviously, I mentioned this earlier, Obama used Yes We Can for his 2008 campaign, which was, again, the rough English translation of Si Se Puede. So let's take a look at black athletes in America. We're not just going to talk about Jackie Robinson. We're going to talk about him, but we're not going to talk about just him. Jesse Owens, incredibly famous track and field athletes in the 1930s. He competes in the 1936 Olympics in Germany when it's controlled by the Nazis, and wins a whole lot of gold medals, doing a whole lot better over Adolf Hitler's Aryan athletes. And you can see a whole lot of people in that picture giving the Nazi salute because they were in Nazi Germany for the Olympics. Jesse Owens, of course, is not giving a Nazi salute. The gentleman in second place not giving a Nazi salute. But the German in third place giving the Nazi salute, and then the different officials and such giving the Nazi salute. So, Nazi Olympics. Jackie Robinson was originally a player. He played for a few years in the Negro Baseball League. That's what it was called. And, hey, recently, a few months ago, actually, as of February 25th, 2021, like a month or two ago? Anyway, very recently, the Major League Baseball sort of voted to retroactively add in the Negro Leagues into the history of MLB. So all of the stats and records of the players that played in those leagues are now officially part of Major League history, which is kind of cool. A little late, but, kind of cool. Can't get in a time machine and go back and fix things, so you just do what you can now. Try and fix it going forward. So he was a very good player in the Negro Leagues. Not the best player, because there were other just wildly successful players in those leagues, but Jackie Robinson kind of got handpicked out by the Brooklyn Dodgers. So he joins the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 1947 season. Remember, this is when segregation is still a huge thing. So he's not allowed to stay at the same hotel as his white teammates. He's not allowed to go into some of the restaurants and as his white teammates, bathrooms as his white teammates, all that stuff. If you've seen the movie, was it 42 was the name of the movie? Because that was his number. Then, it's... I don't know that it was 100% historically accurate. I don't know that every conversation actually happened the way it did, but, overall, they got it. And other black players start following, other teams start hiring on black players, and the Boston Red Sox, by the way, were the very last team to hire a black player in 1959. They held on for 12 years, refusing to hire any black player. So when I say over and over again in class that yes, there was absolutely problems with racism and segregation and all the rest of the stuff we've been talking about in the American South, it wasn't absent in the American North. Boston's a northern city, very northern city, very last team to hire on a black player. Just FYI. Toni Stone, very first black woman to play in the Negro Leagues. She was not allowed in the white women's baseball teams during World War II when the women's leagues were playing, so she had to go play with the men. And there were other black women that ended up joining the Negro Leagues to play baseball with the men, and overall they were very good players. There's interviews from some of the men they played against, and they were like, "Oh no, you didn't mess around with them. They were there to play. They were physical players. They were ready to play." So anyway, cool little tidbit in history. I don't think Toni Stone's going to show up on the STAR test, even if maybe she should. But FYI. Now, this is a famous scene from the Olympics in 1968. Remember, 1936 was the Nazi Olympics with all the people doing the Nazi salute, except for the Jesse Owens, who was up there doing the American, a much more American salute to the flag. So Tommy Smith and John Carlos, both representing the USA, both black men. They get first and third in the 200-meter dash, and when they are up on the pedestal, they hold up their hand in a Black Power salute. The director of the Olympic Games ordered them removed from the Olympics, and took back their medals. You can't do these political things on there. Now, the same man that was directing the Olympic Games in 1968 also directed the 1936 Olympics, where what happened again? Oh, look, they were all giving Nazi salutes. Weird how he didn't take away any medals from the people doing the Nazi salutes, but he would take away medals from black men doing the Black Power salute. Yeah. Anyway, that's a thing that happened. Peter Norman, the Australian, this statue includes him, but a lot of the other statues, the official one I forget what the official one is, doesn't include him. He's not there, because when they asked him about it, they're like, "Oh, can we put you on this pedestal?" He was like, "How about you leave that blank so people can go up and stand with their heroes?" And Peter Norman got just blacklisted when he got back to Australia. People were so angry at him for not doing something about the Black Power salute, not condemning it, he supported it. He supported Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and that cost him his career back in Australia. So, not just problems with racism in America. Anyway. So what's the lasting legacy of this? Well, American sports are filled with athletes of all ethnicity and nationalities. We've got, in Major League Baseball, we've got, players from Latin America, players from Asia, players from, Africa, players from America, white players, black players, Asian American players, Hispanic players, all kinds of players, right? You go to a little league game and you're going to see all kinds of folks playing together. And it's so weird how America, we have this melting pot, and we welcome people in from different cultures, and we adjust our culture, and we kind of, bring people in, and it's so weird how we keep winning so many Olympic medals. Almost like coming together and that way is better, and it makes everybody better. And gosh, as many medals as we win in the men's events at the Olympics, we crush at the women's Olympics. And a big part of that's going to be Title IX, which is a federal law that basically says if you're a college or a high school and you spend X amount of dollars on men's sports, you have to spend that roughly the same amount of money on women's sports. It doesn't have to be the same sport, right? If you spend $50 million on the football team, the men's football team, you don't have to have $50 million on the women's football team, but you do have to offer money for the women's sports teams. And for some reason that ends up meaning we have women athletes that are way better trained than a lot of, not every other nation, plenty of other nations, are getting on that boat, and they're training up their women athletes. But there's a lot of nations out there that do very well at the men's events in the Olympics, but almost nothing at the women's events in the Olympics, because they don't invest in their athletes the way we do. All right, the American Indian movement. So this is a picture from Alcatraz. That one, the island in California, the island prison nobody can ever break out of. One or two people might have actually pulled it off, but Alcatraz. A bunch of Native Americans invade it and take it over in the 1970s? We'll talk about it. Anyway, so 1959, the year the Boston Red Sox hired their first black player. The Indian Relocation Act, aka the Indian Termination Act, goes into effect. Now, the point of this act is not to murder Indians, thankfully. Thankfully, in 1959, the American government decided we're not just going to keep murdering Native Americans. And I know it uses the word termination, and that's pretty rough, but what they mean by that is basically saying, okay, your tribe doesn't exist anymore, therefore all these treaties and, reservations that the U.S. government has put aside for you are no longer a thing, so we're just going to split all of your land up among the reservation land, all the people living in the reservation, we're going to kind of divide it up among all those people, and then they can have that. And if that sounds familiar, it's because the U.S. government's done that before. And usually what happens is, a lot of investors are able to gobble up that land, and then the reservation's gone, and that culture might go away. And so 1968, about 9 years later, the American Indian movement is officially formed in Minnesota. And the whole point of it is we want to preserve our tribal culture, we want to preserve our tribal rights, and it's not just one tribe, it's any tribe that wants to kind of get in on this and organize and fight together to preserve their tribal culture, preserve their tribal rights, preserve their tribal religion, preserve their tribal language. Get in on the American Indian movement. It's still active today. We'll talk about that in a minute. The next year, 1969, November, AIM members, American Indian Movement members, occupy Alcatraz Island in California. They just basically roll in with some boats and take it over. And instead of representing one tribe, they represent Indians of all tribes. That's the name that they give themselves. And it's led by Richard Oakes. Now, Alcatraz is no longer a prison. It's like a tourist attraction in 1969. Tourists would go there on boats, and basically these guys rolled in on boats, took it over, closed it down to tourists, and they stayed there for like a year and a half. They finally get removed on June 11, 1971. This is, to the American Indian Movement, this is a huge success. And anytime you see American Indian Movement protests and occupations that they do, these days they always reference sort of what they call that victory at Alcatraz. American Indian Movement still exists, still works to protect native land, native culture, native rights. One example of this, and again, whether or not you agree with these people politically is 100% up to you, but an example of what the American Indian Movement is doing is the Standing Rock protest against the DAPL oil pipeline. Is the biggest, most famous recent one. There's a lot of activists that got arrested during these protests, and some of them are still in prison from getting arrested from these protests. So the honor treaty rights, right? Like, hey, we have treaties with the American government, and the American government needs to honor these treaties, no matter how old they are. If you make a deal with someone, you got to keep that deal, right? So that's usually what they're asking for. I'm trying to remember. I thought there was a bit on this picture. If somebody sees it, let me know. I think there was something in this picture that mentioned the Alcatraz occupation or something like that. Or maybe some of the art in there was about it. Anyway, this is a pretty recent thing from the last couple of years. So just sort of knocking through a few of these real quick. Some big firsts that happened in the 1960s and 1970s. Shirley Chisholm is the very first African-American woman elected to Congress. She's elected in 1972. She stays in Congress for a while. This is one of her campaign posters. And again, politically, however you guys feel about folks, that's totally up to you. But as a modern sort of legacy to Shirley Chisholm, Vice President Kamala Harris, when she was running in the presidential primary to try and become the Democratic presidential nominee, her posters and the colors that she chose for her campaign were very similar to the Shirley Chisholm ones on purpose. She was referencing the Shirley Chisholm's run for Congress. Doug Wilder, the first African American elected as governor of a state in 1990. I was 8 years old the first time an African American was ever elected as a governor in the United States. Anyway, that's Doug Wilder. Good job, Doug. Oops, wrong way. Thurgood Marshall was the first African American Supreme Court Justice in 1967. We saw him in the notes earlier, not today, but yesterday, I guess. He was the very first African American Supreme Court Justice. And one of the things that people kept asking was well, if this court case has to do with black rights, shouldn't you recuse yourself and not be part of the decision? He's a Supreme Court Justice. He probably should be part of the decision. Anyway. So next unit, we're going to be talking about the Vietnam War. It begins and eventually it does end. So we'll talk about that then. And as always, if you need the citations or where I got this stuff from, it is there in the slides. Any questions, bring them to class. We'll talk about it. Have a great one. See you next time on U.S. History.